everyone, and welcome to another episode of Off the Hook with Matty D. I am your host, Matt DiNardo. And, I'm always talking about fishing, and I like to talk about fishing in the James. And I came across an article just a couple of weeks ago from the James River Association talking about the urgent need to protect migratory fish in the James River. And I said, you know what? This is right on topic with what we like to talk about. We like to talk about shad and stripers and all the different fish, catfish in the James. And there are some fish that I believe truly need protecting. So I reached out, and my guest today, Mr. Tom Dunlap from the James River Association, joining us today. First of all, Tom, thanks so much for coming out today.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Yeah, so this is an interesting article because I noticed this year personally, past couple of years, and again, look, this is a small sample, right? Maybe I'm not a good angler. I kind of think I am sometimes, but I wasn't thick into shad like I've been a couple of years ago. And as I was reading your article, there was some discussion about how migratory fish are on the decline. And I really want to talk about that. But before we get into that, I want to do a little setup here. So tell me, you're a James River keeper. What exactly is that? And then, so people don't know, what is the James River Association?
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. I'll try and do it quickly. So James River Keeper is a conservation professional who works to serve as a voice for a river system, as well as a watchdog and a support structure for the community. If you have issues in your river or in your watershed, you can turn to your river keeper and try and help you with your problems. Let your voice be elevated and speak on behalf of our natural resources to try and ensure that we protect our waterways, we protect our drinking water, and we protect the people that live in our watersheds. And the James River Association is a conservation organization that was established in 1976, really to serve a lot of those goals. And as a result, we carry out a lot of different programming, including our river restoration work, our education programming, our community conservation activities, and our advocacy efforts. And our Riverkeeper program falls within the framework of our advocacy work as well.
Now, I think many times people hear on the news, like we carry a lot of stories about how the James River Association is helping out the James River. Maybe there's a spill and you guys are involved with that and protecting the vital resource, which is the James, because above all else, this is a natural waterway that is a large ecosystem and it needs to be protected.
Oh, absolutely. So the James River makes up about a quarter of the state of Virginia. It provides drinking water to about a third of Virginia's residents. And it's home to some really unique and exceptional environments and aquatic species that call it home.
And so we get into the species, and you published, your group published this article about the urgent need to protect migratory fish. So let's kind of set the table here. What fish are we looking at to protect in the James River?
Well, our call to action for migratory fish also coincided with World Aquatic Species Day. That was our kickoff point for this public awareness campaign. And we're really trying to elevate a number of different native migratory fish species that call the James River home. These include species like American shad, river herring, which are alewife and blueback herring, striped bass, and Atlantic sturgeon as well, just to name a few of these species that are utilizing the James River. And unfortunately, many of these species share something in common, which is that in addition to living in the coastal ocean and relying on the estuary and the freshwater sections of the river for spawning habitat and nursery grounds, they're all in pretty poor shape as far as their fishery stocks are concerned.
When you say pretty poor shape, discuss that a little bit there. I mean, what makes it poor shape?
Please, yeah. So we have management goals through a variety of different networks within our regulatory sphere and within the state level as well as at the federal level. So whether it's the National Marine Fisheries Service or the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission that helps govern mid-Atlantic states and their fisheries management for these species that can migrate out of our state's waters and use the coastal ocean. We also have our Virginia Marine Resource Commission, which oversees our saltwater fish, and the Department of Wildlife Resources overseeing our freshwater fish. There's a lot of different partners in these efforts to protect these species that may spawn and spend a considerable and important part of their life in our Virginia's waterways, but then leave our waterways and are interacting other issues, interstate issues, or even international issues.
Is there a difficulty, and I'm asking this because I don't know, because there are so many different governing bodies. I mean, you just mentioned, so DWR does freshwater, marine wildlife does coastal saltwater. Is it tough to get the groups to coincide? I guess this is kind of an opinion question, I guess, right?
No, I think they're all excellent partners
Okay.
here working on these issues. We've got a lot of really knowledgeable professionals that have spent their lifetimes working to protect these species, including some that I get to spend time working with, talking stats and population numbers with, or even maybe regulatory and policy questions, bouncing them off. I mean, we really need these partners to work in concert to help protect these species. But at the end of the day, I think what we're talking about here is these native species are struggling. So American shad, for example, has been at 0% of their management goals since 2021. And these are goals set by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission or the Chesapeake Bay Program even. But also river herring are currently managed under a moratorium, so you're not fishing for these species as well. In the James River, I think we're really happy to see the return of Atlantic sturgeon, which are a federally endangered species that was thought to essentially be extinct in the river. But I don't want to lose the forest for the trees here and acknowledge that they're a federally endangered species for a reason.
Right.
And I think that a lot of folks in the angler community are probably paying close attention to what's going on with striped bass right now as well, currently managed under emergency management declarations through the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. So clearly, these species that are all using the James River for the same purpose are all struggling in significant ways.
If I can go back a second, you mentioned that the American shad has scored a 0. What is the scale? How is this measured? Like that sounds to me extremely detrimental.
Yeah,
and I guess it
absolutely.
is. So can we kind of expand a little about that?
Please, yes. And so at the James River Association, we put out a State of the James report every 2 years, which highlights 18 different indicators throughout our watershed and really serves as a report card for the health of the James River. Some of our scores represent water quality metrics. Some of our scores represent management actions out in the landscape, and some of them are fish and wildlife indicators. One of them being, in this instance, the American shad. So what we've developed for this particular metric is a benchmark based on some of the recent high watermark data for the species, wherein the population was managed and was successfully, the stock was above the management goals in the 2000s and 2010s, while we were conducting significant stocking efforts to help rebound from actually a crash in the species in the 80s and 90s. So using that as sort of a backdrop, we have standardized units for data collection from our partners at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science who do population surveys. And what they've found is that their units, which relate back to commercial landings going back decades now, show that the species is just nowhere near where these even recent values for this fishery stock was. And as a result, they're at 0% of their management targets, and they're a 0% score in our State of the James report.
Are they at that level due to, like, in the 70s and 80s, I assume it was complete overfishing. Whereas now, is it predatory fish, overfishing, all of the above, more than I even know?
Yeah. Unfortunately, let's use the American shad as an example. It is a circumstance of death by 1,000 cuts. We really have a number of significant issues that these young fish are facing in the James River that could put considerable stress on the fishery overall. You mentioned invasive species. I think a lot of folks in the fishing community might look to a species like blue catfish in the James River in particular, which is an introduced species, which has become an invasive species, and they represent in certain reaches of the tidal fresh estuary between 70 and 80% of the biomass in the river. And these are pretty omnivorous fish. They're going to be out there eating whatever they can track down, and they've even been shown, at least the young fish, to migrate up and down the river trying to track prey. We've found blue crabs in their gut contents. We found American shad in their gut contents. We've even found oysters in their gut contents. So they'll eat a lot of different things, as many blue cat anglers will know. But that's just one piece of the puzzle.
Right.
We have other concerns on the James River, including access to suitable habitat, and that could be in-stream impediments like we might say dams on the James River. But for species that are using even smaller tributaries, for example, maybe we're talking about box culverts, small ones over bridges, or even corrugated pipe culverts that get crunched or something like that to prevent species from getting to that spawning habitat that's critical for producing fish eggs successfully and then having small fish become big fish that anglers can appreciate when they're out there in season. We also have climate change as another example of a high level issue that has knock-on effects all the way down, from changing temperature cues for when these fish want to make their way up the river system to spawn, but also maybe causing a disconnect between those larval fish that hatch and are no longer relying on their yolk sac for food. And then there's a disconnect between available prey species once they're out there trying to hunt. And I'll circle back to habitat briefly and say we got water quality issues in the James too that we're trying to combat with complex framework of state and federal level infrastructure and programs. Sediment, for example, which is a regulated pollutant in the Chesapeake Bay, is a problem we're trying to solve in the James River. And sediment can both bury fish eggs and suffocate them. It can bury underwater grasses, which are, let's say, forage and hiding habitat for them. It can also contribute to issues with water clarity, where now sunlight isn't percolating through the water column and helping underwater grasses thrive because they need photosynthesis to survive. Those are just issues strictly occurring perhaps in the James River directly. I think there's also significant question marks with our migratory fish species is what's happening when they leave our river systems and go out and live in the coastal ocean where they're migrating perhaps up and down the seaboard. So
that is a lot. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, so it's not like if we fix this one issue, we're good. This is a multitude of issues as you just kind of described there. And I think that's important for people to understand. So it's not putting the blame, because I think if someone who's a blue catfisherman, I'm sure you've probably experienced, they're always like, stop hurting my fish. This, but we all know that they're a predatory fish. We've seen this before. So that does, present an issue. And I was fortunate enough a while back to go out with VCU Rice River Centers, where they did shocking of blue cats, to do a count and see what was going on. And we were just south or actually downriver of the James Harrison Bridge. And I could not believe in one shocking the amount of blue cats and then the size of blue cats that came up. It is pretty incredible what has come on here.
Well, and I think something important to highlight for our issue with blue cats, and this might be getting in the fish and weeds, but I think this is the place to do it.
Yep.
Is really our blue cat problem in the James River is a juvenile blue cat problem. It's those smaller blue cats that are going to be more likely to move with their food sources, moving upstream to track down American shad and these other migratory species that are trying to go closer to the fall line to spawn. And they're the ones that are going to make their way back down the tributary in the wintertime looking for other forage like blue crabs or something else. And when we're talking about the trophy fishery in the James, we're talking large blue cats.
Right.
And I think in order to have a successful trophy fishery, we're going to be in alignment with, we need to reduce the overall numbers of blue cats in the river. And full stop, this is an invasive species. They're not supposed to be in the river system. And if we could wave a magic wand, I think that would be the desired outcome. I think right now, with all the issues we have with, let's just use American shad as a focal point for all these migratory fish, we need to make progress on all fronts. So we need to make a dent in habitat suitability and habitat access. We need to make a dent in reducing predation from these invasive species. Climate change is a complex issue, but we need to do what we can to help give these species a leg up. And I think examples of why this could have success in the James, if we put our money where our mouth is and make these efforts to improve water quality and improve habitat access, for example, you look in other tributaries and you see American shad coming back or even thriving. American shad are a pretty weedy fish. They're actually, we might be talking about blue cats as an invasive species in the James River. American shad might be an invasive species in the West Coast in some tributaries.
Right.
And that should give us hope where they're a native species that if we get the conditions right, they will come back.
And so is there a way to improve habitats where we know they are spawning? Is there a way to plant native water grasses, marine grasses, or does that get very difficult to do?
I think that that is the hope that that's where we're getting to.
Okay.
We're working on a number of different issues, including doing something as basic as a habitat suitability analysis that needs to be done in the currently available sections of the river where these American shad could spawn. That requires funding for our partners with our state agencies or our academic institutions to carry out this essential work so that we can help boost these species. We also need to make improvements like installing in the landscape better sediment controls for our working lands, our urban lands,
Right.
so that we can reduce that sediment
It's
impact
spilling in.
that's going into the water through precipitation and rainfall, carrying sediment downstream and burying our fish eggs when we actually have successful spawning runs, or burying that habitat perhaps when that's the critical remaining habitat left in the tidal James.
So we've talked a lot about shad, but there's also, as you mentioned earlier, alewife, striped bass, blue herring, and then sturgeon as well. If we kind of switch gears for a second and talk about striped bass, there are regulations on striped bass. Should that be augmented? Do you all work with DWR Marine Fisheries and think about, because we know that striped bass is being heavily fished in many areas.
Yeah, and the striped bass issues, Chesapeake Bay issue, it's a James River issue, Virginia tribs and beyond.
Right.
In terms of answering your question, we really rely on our partners who are doing the day-to-day scientific research to understand how sustainable the fishing practices that are currently occurring are for these species. I think what we're all looking at is a really worrisome trend with striped bass, wherein for a species that relies on strong year classes to help the overall fisheries succeed in the long term, we've seen this worrisome trend of a couple of poor year classes in a row now. And that starts to raise those red flags that maybe more significant management might be necessary to protect this iconic species.
And when you say a poor year class, you're talking reproduction, finding fry numbers, and numbers dwindling. Is that what we're looking at?
That is exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing me down.
It's all just dropping as well. And so those studies are done by DWR Marine Fisheries. They're kind of figuring out the amount to fry and things like that.
A lot of this boots on the ground research is actually being conducted in this case by our academic partners at the Virginia Marine Science, who are carrying out the juvenile striped bass seine survey. Or they're doing work on American shad, for example, in the river systems right now during this very narrow window when conditions are theoretically right in the James River for American shad to have their spawning run.
And are you hearing anything about this year's particular run, or is the data still being collected and it's kind of early?
Data is being collected currently.
Yeah.
I'm hearing rumblings that there are perhaps good shad seasons on some of Virginia's other tributaries.
Things like the Rappahannock or
the York River estuary, for example. But the James, I got a text yesterday. Just this work that's being done represents a continuation of historical fishing work that's happened. And what I mean by that is the strategy is gill nets, or it had been until very recently, which was this commercial fishing framework that's been used for decades, even for generations. And there are estimates in the James River where a century ago, perhaps, we'd catch, I think one estimate I saw from pre-1900 was 60,000 female shad in the James using this strategy. Last couple of years in the James River, they caught 0 fish with this technique.
0 fish.
0 fish.
Wow.
So that doesn't mean that one lucky angler on the best day ever in the James River isn't going to reel in an American shad. But our researchers, who it is their responsibility to carry out these studies so we can have reliable data to figure out what's going on with our fishery stocks, they were not seeing any fish.
Wow. That's incredible. And that's alarming.
Incredible and alarming.
Yeah, really is.
Yeah.
Should there then be a greater moratorium in the sporting for shad right now to allow a year, 2 years, 3 years? Because anytime, I know you're not supposed to keep shad. I guess there's a limitation which you can keep, but even people who catch and release, there is a morbidity rate because they're not handled correctly. We're taking the picture, we're keeping it out of the water too long, we're grabbing the gills or doing something silly that we shouldn't do.
I think the best thing we can do as a conservation organization is doing what we're doing right now, which is trying to raise the awareness of how sensitive the situation is for these native species in the James River. Remind folks that when they're out there carrying out their pastime, that extra protection wherever possible is what you should be exercising, and definitely not targeting these species at the same time. There's moratoriums on river herring and American shad right now, which I think is some of the best protection that we can have. But we know maybe striped bass is an example where they've done about all they can do with the commercial fishery at this point, and they're really pressing on the recreational fishery to see if they can't protect that migratory species at this point.
When we talk about striped bass, we want to roll back to that for a second, and we talk about the commercial fisheries, it's pretty much Virginia is commercial fisheries but then these striped bass go migrating up Jersey, Long Island, coastal Massachusetts, and the regulations are different as we go up the waterways, aren't they? Or are they the same?
Well, that's where the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission comes in on all this, because they work to get the states in concert so that these management activities or programs are carried out across these states that share these waters. Yeah.
Gotcha. So it is kind of a level playing field.
Yes, it is. I think it's by design, and I think that this is an exact example of where that's incredibly necessary.
Gotcha. Very good. Okay, so studies are being done right now. Studies come back dismal for the James River. Let's say they come back that way.
Still being conducted,
right?
We are all crossing our fingers, but certainly that's the way things are looking.
And if we have another year of this and a year after that, I mean, we're going down. We're already on the slippery slope, but now we're sliding faster.
I think that you've hit the nail on the head. I think we've been sliding faster for a while. We've been trying to raise awareness about this issue for many years now. We were fortunate enough to get to work with the General Assembly a couple of years ago to seek funding for a recovery plan for American shad in the James River. A bunch of different conservation partners, academic institutions, our state agencies, representatives from the federal government, institutions like NOAA came together to help get smart people in the room to think about this issue, think about the specific issues that are impacting this fish in the James River, and create a plan to get us on the road to recovery. And that plan was actually submitted to the General Assembly in the fall of 2023. So now we think of it as we have a roadmap with a bunch of different immediate actions that we can take, either identifying projects or steps that need to be taken, maybe even regulations or policy efforts that could be helpful along the way. And in the very immediate term, research and identifying data gaps that we're going to need to have answers for, just so that we can begin to make progress. And I already mentioned one so far on this chat, just identifying that suitable habitat in the James River so we can better understand where to target our efforts for restoration activities in the future.
Is there an idea already with the James River Association, with your group, as to where that might be? Like creating that better habitat? Like, has some of your research shown where that might be?
I would point out that we really rely on the research efforts from our state agency partners and academic institutions. We get to stand on their shoulders and come on a show like this and talk about their excellent work. And I really want to emphasize that.
Sure.
But, they definitely have done some studies already. We even have things like the Shad Cam at Bocher's Fishway, where you can hop on right now and take a look and see what fish are going through there. And through these ongoing activities, we get snapshots and ideas of where fish are at in the river system, and combine that with what our knowledge is of in-stream impediments and other conditions that give us an idea of where that spawning habitat really is in the tidal fresh estuary right now. But we do need to have a finer resolution on that detail of knowing where the existing submerged aquatic vegetation, those are underwater grass beds, could be for these species, or getting a better understanding of even what the substrate, the rocky, gravelly, sandy, mucky conditions are on the bottom of the river. Because when these fish eggs are released in that spawning activity, they're going to sort of float, maybe even bounce along the bottom, perhaps. And conditions need to be right. Otherwise, these fish eggs could get buried. They could then get suffocated, and we end up with poor year class after poor year class after poor year class.
Is there a point in time where the damage that has been done is so great that it will be monumental to overcome?
I think that we've got examples, unfortunately, a tremendous number of examples in this day and age of where we've lost species. But, I think in the James River, we've got a couple of examples where we've seen the opposite of that. I've already mentioned,
Sturgeon.
yeah, Atlantic sturgeon is a great example where we essentially thought they were all but extinct because conditions were not right for them in the river system, it seemed. Perhaps water quality issues were playing a significant factor, and not to overstate it, but the tremendous pressure put on it by historical fishing practices on that particular species. And yet, we're seeing more of them than perhaps we have in dozens, decades of years. In fact, a plug for my organization,
Sure.
one of the wonderful things that JRA has going on is in September, we do sturgeon watching tours because these species have rebounded so successfully. So you can go out with us on one of our pontoon boats and go watch these ancient species breach out of the water like a dolphin. They jump right out of the river system, and getting to see one of these, it's so impressive because they can grow, 6, 7, 8 feet long. They're armored. They essentially look like a prehistoric animal, like a dinosaur. It's a really powerful experience to see them jumping in the James River. But bald eagles is another example of a species on the brink that's come back in the James River watershed in particular. And in that case, I think historically we all point to pesticide use like DDT as a principal example of why that species might have been suffering as much as they are. Right. And with regulatory steps and a concerted effort from the populace, those species are well above carrying capacity in the James River. We have other staff at JRA that's coined the term, we're net exporters of bald eagles in the James River watershed because we have all our nesting sites occupied, and that's a wonderful place to be for us. And so these are bright spots for us that give us reason to believe that with the right steps, especially trying to make progress in as many different avenues as we can see these species rebound and have success in the James River.
I think what's really interesting to me today, what I'm learning is the many different partnerships that are happening to shape our waterways and protect the different species. I don't think that many people understood or understand how, I mean, you do because you work with it day in and day out, but the average person doesn't realize the different handshaking that has to go on because of the different waterways and all that. I think that's pretty interesting.
Yep, I think that showcases, especially for the angler community, that when you are spending money on a fishing license, it's going to help support the staff that helps collect the data so that I can be here on this show and talk about American shad, for example, and perhaps how few of them are going through the Bocher's Dam Fishway. And I think it's just so important to recognize that we're all part of a coalition here in an effort to conserve these natural resources and protect them as best we can.
Yeah, I've been using the shad cam on the air, showing it, and majority of what I've seen has been everything but shad this year, and it's kind of sad in that respect.
Yeah, I think I actually heard some similar sentiment just earlier this week. I think it's easy to point back to maybe the pre-1900s and think about our fisheries and think about what we've lost, because we've lost a tremendous amount. When we think about what our benchmarks are for getting these species back to some sort of sustainable level in our river systems,
Right.
That's just a fraction of perhaps what they were historically. But at the same time, Bocher's Fishway here in Richmond, we had the goal of being able to pass 500,000 shad. I think I learned very recently that the maximum number of American shad that have ever gone through Bocher's has been a little less than 700.
A little less than 700. That's a very small number.
Now, that is a very low number,
Yeah.
but I also think that you can, in certain times, see other species using that considerably. So we've had a lot of gizzard shad, a lot of other species able to make their way through that fishway, letting us know that it has the capacity to pass those fish. But we really need to see more use, and I think that shows that efforts just like increasing habitat in one of these different dams in the James River are not the only shoe that needs to fall in order for us to see results.
Gotcha. And I'm my mind is blown by so many different things because I thought it was only a smaller issue, but it's a larger issue. So, and that's where when you monitor the water quality, you're looking at pH range, you're looking at salinity, you're looking at different things up here, and that obviously affects the different migratory species as well.
Certainly, yeah. So the interaction between water quality indicators, in this case, things like temperature, things like salinity, dissolved oxygen is a very important one for our aquatic wildlife.
Right.
Nutrients, like the regulated nutrients in the Chesapeake Bay, we talk about nitrogen, we talk about phosphorus, we talk about sediment. We talked a lot about how sediment is interacting with our water quality and how it could directly impact these fish species.
Right.
But our other regulated nutrients are certainly playing a role as well. It could be these are principal components of fertilizers, for example, and they could cause increased algal growth, which could be driving things like hazardous algal blooms that are even toxic for humans and pets. But they could just be causing algal blooms that reduce photosynthetic capability for underwater grasses because they literally obstruct the ability of light to penetrate through the water column.
And that comes in from, and again, from upstream farms that are, or different landowners that are putting pesticides or fertilizers in. Runoff then comes into the James that way, and it flows down.
That's certainly an example.
Okay.
You know, I think that we're looking across all sectors for this. I think wastewater has been one historically where we've seen a lot of issues and frankly, a lot of improvements. Right now in Virginia, we're seeing a lot of improvements in the agricultural sector, but we really need to have a lot more work done. Even the urban sectors can be sources of nitrogen and phosphorus. You know, we think about our farmland and we think about fertilizer application,
Right.
but we don't necessarily think about our neighbor who's using products maybe to make their lawn green at times of year where it's historically and ecologically not supposed to be quite that green,
Right.
quite that lush in the environment we've got here in Virginia. And there are other sources of nitrogen and phosphorus. It gets pretty complex, but that's the point, that they're a regulated nutrient for a reason.
Gotcha. The last question that I have, and by the way, I did. We were talking. I brought up the Shad Cam here so that people can see. I've been watching it a little bit as we've been talking, and at middle of the day, sometimes we don't see a lot of action. Of course, it's more of a dusk and image thing, but people can check that out at dwrvirginia.gov/shadcam. There goes some sediments running through. How? And again, you rely on your partners, and I get that. What is the next big step that you see us taking as a state, as a people, to help? You mentioned, the habitats in the waterway. You mentioned, the different protecting the waters from. We just talked about the nitrogens and different phosphorus that come through. Is there something that everybody can do to help out? Like, I know James River Association does planting days because that impacts the soil locally to hopefully stop some of the runoff. What can we do day in and day out?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. When we look at these complex problems like climate change or invasive species, you can feel a little personally helpless. But, with blue cats, for example, if you're fishing for blue cats, maybe you use the small blue cat you catch as bait for the next blue cat you're trying to catch. Around the house, maybe you reduce your use of nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizer on your grass. Maybe you decide that's just something that you're going to let slide for the year or forever, perhaps.
Right.
I think simple things like consumption habits, when it comes to issues like that, they can all make a difference and all add up. One in suburban and urban areas that I think has some really catchy phrasing, like your pick up the poop campaigns for your recreational pets around the house. Clean up after your dog. Those are all sources of nitrogen and phosphorus for our waterways, and that's ways that everyday people can make a dent in improving water quality and improving conditions for species like our migratory fish.
Just simple things that we can do that can make a big difference and go a long way.
They all add up. Things like organizations that JRA represents, for example, are trying to work on are getting funding for some of these necessary projects that were identified in the American Shad Recovery Plan for the James River. maybe you could write your representative and let them know that migratory fish is an issue that you care about. You'd like to see these projects funded so we can see how we can best support these species.
Very good. Tom, I appreciate your time and coming in today to talk about this. Let me just bring up that article once again. It's the jamesriver.org protect-migratory fish. This is the article that kind of got me like really thinking, and I reached out right away, and Tom was grateful to come in. And I thought this map was really interesting, by the way, showing the historic range of where shad, sturgeon, herring, bass used to go to, and then where they get to now, and how the waterways have really been shut down, based, I guess, Tom, on things like dams, like the different types of stuff that have been built around, and our waterways are somewhat constricted as well.
Yeah. And this is another example where we're getting some data from excellent partners. A lot of that data on stream barriers is coming from the Nature Conservancy, for example. But, one thing that's also showcased in that map is the relative populations. So when you look at the width of those lines as they change, you're looking at historical estimates, maybe the most recent semi-contemporary commercial fish landing data for river herring, for example, compared to data I pulled in 2008 for the last time that those species together were able to be commercially harvested. We might be at less than 0.5% of what we were in the 1900s for that species, for example. But, I think that this landing page is a really great spot to learn more about migratory fish.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, if you want to look at some of the excellent data that's collected by our partners as well, www.stateofthejames.org is how you get to our river health report card. Right there on the top right, you see a box that says 2023 interactive report card.
Yep.
Click on that. This shows the actual report card that we use in our day-to-day work, and each of these indicators is blinking. And when you click on striped bass, for example, down there,
if I can find it that
right
quick,
there,
juvenile striped bass. There we go.
it's going to pull up the actual data behind that score for you, and even show you links to where that data is coming from, so you can dig a little deeper right into the metrics that got us here today, talking about American shad and our migratory fish species.
And if you want, I did notice up here on the top right on the previous page, let me see if I grab that. There is a donate now to help out if you want to do it that way as well.
Yep. Donations always help environmental nonprofits like us do the work we do. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, the James River Association does work in a lot of different areas besides riverkeeper work in our advocacy program.
Right.
We do environmental education throughout the watershed. We do community conservation for folks who feel like they live in suburban and urban environments. A lot of the things I mentioned to you a second ago about what people can do, you can learn about those through our community conservation program. You can even get yourself a rain barrel and help reduce that stormwater from your house, for example.
And then use that to water your plants and things around the house.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then our river restoration work, where we're doing hand in glove work with property owners throughout the watershed as well to help make those properties more sustainable, more resilient, and reduce those impacts on our waterways.
Very good. Tom, I want to thank you again for coming on Off the Hook with Matty D and giving us an insight into the issues that you're all seeing and that we're seeing even as anglers as well. I mean, reduced population and trying to save the species, because at the end of the day, the ecosystem is going to fail if we start to lose fish even more. And we don't want that.
Thank you, Matt, for having me. Yeah, and that's as good a reminder as anything that, if we like catching our big fish, we need small fish. And if we like our small fish, we need habitat for those small fish to survive and thrive. So that's what we're talking about here today.
Very good. Thanks, Tom. Again, my guest today has been Tom Dunlap. He's a riverkeeper for the James River Association. And again, the story was really about protecting migratory fish and the different ways that we can protect those species and have them thrive coming back. Hope to see you next time for another episode of Off the Hook with Matty D. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Off the Hook with Matty D.